2, 1, live.
Good morning. Recognizing a quorum of commissioners, I call the June 26th, 2023 meeting of the Cannabis Control Commission to order. This meeting is being held remotely pursuant to Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022 and is being recorded. Commissioners Camargo, Concepcion, Roy, Stebbins, and myself are participating in today's meeting, although Commissioner Concepcion is having some issues logging on, but she will join us shortly. Today, we will not be taking any official votes, but are having this meeting to provide an update on the working groups that are looking at changes, regulatory changes mandated by Chapter 180, and to assess and gain consensus on items that we will consider for future regulatory changes. I will ask the commissioners wishing to comment or ask questions during any part of the meeting, raise their hands to be recognized. So just good morning to everybody and thank you. And we're hoping we can get Commissioner Concepcion on board soon. But the first thing that I wanted to do is to provide a little bit of an update to people to let them know about the progress that's being made by the working groups. Chapter 180 that was passed by the legislature last year was looking to bring greater equity into the cannabis market, and we have 3 different working groups that are looking at these issues. I will report back for the social equity group. Commissioner Concepcion and I are on this working group with a handful of folks who've been doing a great job looking at how we can require municipalities to incorporate social equity into the process of giving out host community agreements. At this point in time, we've completed about 90% of the work. Those regulations are now being, proposed regulation changes are being reviewed by our legal team, and those should be coming out fairly shortly, probably within the next couple of weeks. One of the sort of glitches in the way the statute was passed last August was it mandated that communities, or host communities, implement equity into the process of giving out host community agreements. So what we had determined, given that July 1st deadline, is that our working group is developing a memo that provides suggested options for communities to incorporate, beginning July 1st, to incorporate equity into that process. We are just about finished with that memo. I'm hoping that later today we can put that to bed. So just letting folks know that that should be coming out publicized within the next couple of days. I wanted to ask Commissioner Roy, she and Commissioner Concepcion are working on the group that is focused on host community agreements. Again, if you could just sort of give us a little bit of an update, Commissioner Roy, just to let us know where that stands and what people can expect.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you so much. I'd be happy to do that. As the chair stated, myself, along with Commissioner Concepcion, are on the regulatory lead for the host community agreement working group. We have a fantastic group. We've worked really hard on this, mindful of what's in statute. And so we have our policy recommendations over to our legal team at this point, who is going back and forth with us and making final revisions and edits. So I am very hopeful that over the next few weeks, we'll have something that will be brought before the commission and then for public consumption, so we can have that public hearing and testimony and public comment period. I will say that we have engaged with stakeholders. So whether it's the MMA, we had that that event with them, or you know, I just spoke a couple weeks ago in front of 150 licensees out at the Flower Expo. It was great to engage with them. So we've engaged with numerous stakeholders on this issue. I will say this issue is of high interest and priority for a lot of folks in the cannabis space. So we're eager to get those recommendations, those policy recommendations out, and have a great discussion around them.
Do you have a ballpark as to when that might be made public?
Yeah, I'm hoping, when's our July meeting? Maybe, if not the second meeting in July, maybe. Yeah. We're at the we're in the end zone, but we're just like doing the replay now and making sure that, they're going over and seeing if there's any minor tweaks that we need to do. So we're really close, Madam Chair. So I would say hopefully within the next 2 weeks.
I'm hopeful that we can get it. We're going to have, I believe we're scheduling 3, just for the public to know, 3 different meetings. Our regular, that first meeting in July, and I think it's July 10th, of course.
13th, Grace. Thank you, Grace. July 13th and 17th. Yeah.
So hopefully that will be made public for the agenda before that. I think that's what we're shooting for, but obviously there's a lot of competing demands on our legal staff. So we're trying to make sure that we can get that done. And then we will be voting on both the host community agreement and the social equity in those subsequent 2 meetings. So then as people understand, it will then go over to the Secretary of State's office as part of the process. Then there is an additional public comment period. So Commissioner Ray, you had your hand up.
And I just want to thank not only our working group, who's incredible, but also legal. The legal team has been great. I just met with them again on Friday, and we've had multiple meetings with them, and they, like you said, they have a lot on their plate right now between the 3 working groups and all the minutes and everything else that comes down the pike for them. So I just want to thank them as well. They've done a great job.
Oh, thank you. And the good news, we know that there are searches going on for several more attorneys to come on board. So we're hoping that the cavalry is coming to provide them with a little bit of support there. We know that, our legal team has been doing double duty here, so we appreciate all their hard work. So with that, if Commissioners Stebbins and Camargo could give us a little bit of an update on the social consumption working group, maybe what you've been doing, what you're learning. I know that there are some things coming up that people would want to know about. So if you could just give us a little bit of an update on that.
Sure. I'm Chair. I'm happy to go first, and then I'll hand it over to my colleague. First of all, if you'll permit me, I do want to pick up on the conversation we were just having about the update on HCAs. I had the opportunity to go to a CBA regional roundtable on Friday out at Hudson Botanicals, and I will tell you a number of topics came up. Social consumption, marketing, investigations, compliance, but I would say one of the most predominant issues was what we were just talking about, host community agreements. Number of attendees raised it, including the woman who owns STEM up in Haverhill, all coming down to voice their concerns about HCAs and impact fees. And I'm looking forward to the work that Commissioner Roy and Commissioner Concepcion have done. But obviously, as the industry landscape starts to get a little more competitive, the assessment of impact fees becomes all that more important. For our working group, you're right, we have some things that are coming up on the calendar. First of all, we sent out a survey, as you know, to every micro business licensee or applicant, every cooperative grower, every social equity program participant and licensee, as well as every economic empowerment program participant. That survey went out. All those responses are due at the end of this week. So if you're one of those who received a survey or should have received a survey, go back through your inbox, even check your spam folder just in case it got diverted there. But obviously we're anxious to get a lot of input from those potential licensees as to how they view social consumption and what a lucrative license type might look like. Secondly, the working group's first listening session will be held tomorrow night at Holyoke Community College beginning at 6 p.m. I want to thank Akila Armstrong, her strong role in helping to organize these listening sessions, our working group teams, the staff who are offering to help out at the virtual hearing, as well as the in-person hearing, and of course, our great communications team for helping us with meeting support. We have a virtual listening session that will be held on July 18th. And
excuse me, Commissioner Stebbins, can I ask you a quick question? Because I may or may not be able to get out to Holyoke tomorrow, but will that will be, can people attend that remotely as well? Or is it just the remote session that people can?
Just the remote session that people
Okay.
can log into and offer comments. And then
So-
we have a,
But just to
sorry.
remind people, because this is not a regular commission meeting, it is a listening session. So there are limitations as to what commissioners can and can't do at these public meetings. And that's also why it's not being remotely broadcast as this is. So I just want to clarify that process for people. Sorry.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. We are inviting speakers to come in and offer their thoughts. We've had great, I would say, publication and promotion about the event. Even on Friday, some of the folks from at the CBA roundtable said that they planned not only attending one session, but wanted to make both in-person sessions. So July 18th will be our virtual listening session, and our second in-person listening session will be hosted by Mass Bay Community College at their Wellesley campus on July 20th. I also want to just thank the board of the Mass Chiefs of Police and all of the statewide regional tourism councils who invited me to their most recent meetings to discuss our work on social consumption, as well as upcoming events, and really inviting them to weigh in with their comments as we start to think about taking pen to paper on what this new regulatory framework will look like. But with that, I'll kick it over to my colleague, Commissioner Camargo, if there's anything she wants to add.
Thank you, Commissioner Stubbins. Good morning. Good morning. I think we might have gone right into the work, but I'm going to kind of give some comments, if I may. I think, Commissioner Stubbins, you pretty much covered everything for our social consumption group, but I'll take a quick pause just to do some brief comments. Not sure how many folks were up last night watching the BET Music Awards, but they were amazing. They were celebrating 50 years of hip hop and urban culture. It was a reminder to me, for someone who grew up in urban America in the 90s, that hip hop, like cannabis, was once sort of considered counterculture, right? And cannabis, like hip hop, has made a major impact in the lives of so many people through medical marijuana and adult use. It got me to think last night, right? 11 o'clock at night before a meeting this morning, as sitting commissioners, it made me think, where would this market be 50 years from now, right? So they're celebrating 50 years of hip hop. Where will this market be 50 years? I don't know where some of us will be, but based on some of the policies we're trying to incorporate and create, will we hinder the industry with unnecessary policies and a rush to create policies that will later fail? Or will we help the industry move forward? I hope that we can work together internally, externally, and be on the right side of history, right? When I look back at all the artists, and I think many of you will know some of the artists that are celebrating 50 years of hip hop, right? They did a beautiful tribute to Tina Turner last night as well. But, really thinking about where the work that we're doing today, how would that impact Massachusetts? And when Massachusetts is celebrating 50 years of legalization, will we be proud, right? I always say this job doesn't come with a manual, but I hope that we can all be there 50 years from now and sort of look back and say, hey, I'm so proud of the work that we've done here at the CCC. So I wanted to just share that. I think it's relevant. And, Commissioner Stubbins, thank you for the update. I'm excited to be at Holyoke Community College tomorrow to just listen. I think we're going to have a good crowd of folks. And Madam Chair, I think you asked about the virtual. We're definitely doing a third one virtually. I think that one will be well attended as well. And we look forward to just, moving forward in the process. So thank you.
I, for one, will not be there in 50 years. So I hope that the work you do will be written on my gravestone.
That we all do.
So if you could just sort of give us an update, one of the things that I had, suggested that the other two working groups set a deadline, and I'm hoping that this working group can establish a deadline of sort of a first draft by the end of September. And I don't know if that is workable, but I would hope that by our first July meeting, you could report on that. I know that we had a lot of kind of onboarding with the two groups that with the one group that I was working on, and I know just tangentially the other group, that until we placed a deadline on when we needed to get that first draft, we were spending a lot of time listening and talking, and then we needed to move forward. Do you have a sense of when you think we might get that first draft for us to react and respond to?
I mean, I'll jump in, Chair. Obviously, we're anxious to see how these listening sessions go and how the survey goes, but I would like either in July or our first meeting in August to be able to come back and give you a more definitive timetable after we've had a chance to go back and connect with our working group and figure out where we are.
So again, I'm hoping that you could set a deadline as soon as possible, because I do think that, I mean, Commissioner Camargo, maybe you can sort of give us a little bit of flavor. I know that you were able to travel to some other jurisdictions to take a look at what they're doing there. Maybe you can share with us a little bit of how that shaped your thinking going forward right now, or is that timely to share that with us? Or
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, to just kind of hit your first point, I hear you in terms of you suggesting for us to get a deadline, and I applaud your efforts to moving everybody forward. I think respectfully, Commissioner Stebbins and I are leading our social consumption working group, so I think it's really up to us to decide our deadlines, if any. So I want to just respectfully, push back on that a little bit. I know what you're trying to do, and I appreciate it. I also don't want to, I want to make sure that the public understands that Commissioner Stebbins and I are leading this group and doing the work. So that's one thing. In terms of, absolutely, I'm enthusiastically excited to share with you all some of the work that we did in our recent trip to San Francisco and Oakland. I'm working with our communications team to sort of think about how do we package that internally and externally, and really be able to give you a more comprehensive look or overview of everything that we learned. Social consumption is not on the agenda today, so I'm not going to sort of get into it. I think there's a process that we have in place to make sure that we're having these conversations. So sit tight, and we'll get back to that. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, and just respectfully, I know that you guys are currently leading that effort, but all of us are getting questions from different folks about the timing on that. And obviously the social equity fund may well be something that is leveraged, and I know that they've had some issues with the controller's office transferring or not transferring the full amount anticipated by the legislature, and this is I understand you have to get it right. And I understand that when we were trying, or when the commission was trying to promote a social equity by giving, exclusivity within, delivery businesses. And frankly, I don't think that the commission got that regulation right, because basically we established a license, set it aside for social equity applicants, and then it basically was a license that is very difficult, if impossible, to make profitable. And so this is I just will, while we're in open session and in open meeting here, one of the things that I am very concerned about, I know that we removed the requirement of having pilot programs, which would have required municipalities to go through a licensing process, and so we would create communities that also had to, in essence, compete, or at least in a time frame, compete for a limited number of pilot projects or programs. I am very concerned that we move slowly and that we do this with a lens towards where is this money going to come from, because these are fairly expensive licenses, just like we have no social equity licensees in cultivation, because that is an incredibly expensive initial investment. This too, depending on how you configure this, could well be a very expensive configured license. And so if I can, because I won't be able to testify at that hearing session, or I don't think I can because it's not technically an open session. You know, that is going to be my constant refrain, is making sure that we understand not just opening up the door, but making sure that people can actually walk through it and make money on it, and that it is sustainable. Because I think that the mistakes that were made in the drafting, and not mistakes, they were caution, but with the delivery license, I think has created problems in terms of providing that true access to that business opportunity. And I want to make sure that we start slow, we make it go right, and we do it in a limited fashion. Again, that's just my opinion, obviously not a sense of the commission. Go ahead, Commissioner Stebbins.
Yeah, no, I echo those thoughts, Chair, and I think we've been pretty clear as we've talked about this at previous meetings, and in kind of a different definition of your words, but we are looking for, as we approach this, what can be the innovation in this space, which I think is driving a lot of how we're viewing what other jurisdictions that have already been in this space are doing. And to your point, I think we've worded it as lucrative. We want this to be a lucrative license type for anybody who applies, or else we're just going through an exercise of creating a license type that once you do the numbers, we don't want anybody sitting there saying, well, that's not a license type I want to apply for, because there's no ROI at the end of the day. So I hear you, and I think our entire working group also hears that message. And just to reassure you, that continues to be our focus as we move ahead.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Camargo.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I would also say to the public, I know there's about 100 folks on listening, but again, Commissioner Stebbins and myself are leading the social consumption group. You have a question, you have a thought, you want to testify, email us. Our emails are on the website. I know that I'm getting questions about municipal equity and HCAs, and what I tell my colleague, folks that are asking me, is that my colleagues are working on it. And I trust my colleagues. We may agree to disagree at some point, but I really trust that you are doing your work in your working groups as well. So I'll just say to the public, folks have questions, please reach out to Commissioner Stebbins or myself when it involves social consumption. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks. And again, as reported, I'm hoping that these other two groups, we're going to see the fruits of their labor in the next couple of weeks. So we'll be able to do that. And again, just remembering that this is a multi-pronged process, that we want to, once we get it in writing, then it becomes real. So that again, just to make that, stress that again. So anyway, I don't know, Commissioner Concepcion has joined us. I don't know if you have any comments. We really didn't, again, this is a little bit of a different meeting, just to kind of gain consensus on a couple of things and report back to the public on what's going on with some of the regulatory writing. Any comment that you'd like to make, Commissioner Concepcion?
Well, first, good morning. I'll start off by saying good morning. I think if anyone's following me on social media, and a lot of the people internally know, I've been away in a bubble for a little bit over a week at Harvard Business School for their Young American Leaders program. And we were tech-free, and which was challenging to a lot of people, but actually really relaxing in an odd way. Classes were from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., but it was a cross-sector of leaders from across the country. So I gathered with the executives from Amazon, Volkswagen, federal officials, local mayors, and municipal officials as well. And it was really insightful. It's given me a lot of great perspective in terms of the work that we're doing here, and taking sort of a macro level view of where we can and should be going in anticipation of some of the changes that might happen in this industry. But I just wanted to say hello, because I think it's been a while since I've talked to everyone in this virtual space, because I've been off the map, but it couldn't have happened at a better time. And I'm pretty sure, because I'm on the host community agreements working group with Commissioner Roy and the municipal equity group with you, Madam Chairwoman, I'm sure that you've sort of given a partial update before I was able to join. So I want to thank you in advance, because I know you all understand the work that we've been doing in those different departments. In terms of, I only had one comment for the social consumption group, and it wasn't for those in the room. at the CCC, but for anyone listening, is that it's important to remember this. It's a different timeline. You don't have the same sort of regulatory time frame that we do because social consumption technically was already a part of those regs. So I know that you're not beating it down to make sure you're done by November. And I just wanted to say that to anyone in the public who may not understand that it's a little bit different in terms of that in comparison to the other working groups. And then the last point that I want to make, and this is something that I brought up in our last meeting, is that although we have not listed it and it's not a working group that was created as a result, there are still those changes around suitability that will have to be implemented as well by that November timeline. So I just wanted to, again, just shed light on that. And I know we have some discussions internally just to make sure that that's in place as well. And that's it.
Do you want to give any context about suitability so that we are all on the same page here?
Sure, I would love to. So we have, and within our regulations, suitability regulations and charts that are now inconsistent with the law. So what we have in the regs states that, you know, if you have certain offenses on your record, you still cannot be employed by any, you know, cultivation, manufacturing, retail, anything. And under the new law, the change that I know I've been really vocal about removes that. We are no longer allowed at the CCC to put those barriers in place. And the other thing that I have talked about at length, but I'll say it a little bit more concisely, hopefully, is that we have done some damage here at the Cannabis Control Commission in terms of collateral consequences, in terms of creating barriers for people who have criminal records, in terms of continuing sort of a penalizing people for harms that were committed and that they served time for. And so they have been unable to open up shop and own here, as well as being employed. So luckily the law changed the employment component of that, but we still have some things on our books and our regs that continue to further those barriers. And that's what I've talked about sort of at length. And I can see, Madam Chairwoman, a little confusion. So I want to ask if you have any questions about it.
But I want to ask, I mean, you know, my goal today, not taking any official votes, but to sort of gain some consensus, you know, on, I mean, I use the term low hanging fruit, which to me is both sort of everyone, we have a consensus of the commissioners, so we can ask our staff to hopefully write something that would be simple for them to do, because there's a lot of pressure, and this is also just by way of explaining, you know, to the folks who are watching. But is this something that could be considered low-hanging fruit that we could put into this next sort of tranche of regulation?
The quick and easy answer is no, but it will happen anyways. It's not low-hanging fruit, but there's a time frame around it. So it's not under that category, and it's not included in the list. It's just something that's a necessary that requires some work and attention. But luckily, it will not take a lot of different staffers. I've also mentioned this, that I've already talked to the legal team. So the minds are there. It's not a heavy lift. I think that we understand it. We have Andrew Carter, Michael Baker, who is phenomenal and comes from the State House and understands this really well. And I know Commissioner Camargo has offered her help and assistance as well there. So I think our minds can sort of get this down to a place where we can present it formally in front of the entire commission.
Is this something you think can be done July, August, or are you thinking more September?
I think we can do it by August.
Okay, right. You got the floor. Commissioner Camargo, were you raising your hand? No?
I kind of was
tap into my own thing. Oh, sorry, Commissioner. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. Commissioner Concepcion, finish up. And
I was just saying the beauty is I'm just doing what I used to do anyways. So a lot of it is legal drafting and just making sure that it aligns with existing regs. And so that's why I'm saying those four brains, I think that we can hash this out and be able to come with something that's comprehensive. That's all. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Camargo, did you want to make another comment? No. So Commissioner Concepcion, do you want to share, you know, and again, I know that you've been sort of off the grid for the last week or so. Have you had an opportunity to maybe think about what you consider
low-hanging fruit that you would want to, publicize here and let us sort of make a determination as to whether or not we should ask our staff to move forward with this? Do you have a list?
I have my list is so short. I have bigger things that I'm mapping out a way to do it with limited resources without taking or creating working groups, at least not internal working groups.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I mentioned in our last conversation was around the registration cards, agent registration, and having that, attaching that to the individual rather than the entity, because it will help owners because they're no longer, paying for agent registration cards for individuals who might choose to not work there for a longer span of time. And it also helps the individual because if you are able to attain an agent registration card, that means in essence you are suitable to be employed. That takes away the need for the employer to kind of figure out if this person can in fact get to this state. And the individual can then use that to go to different entities. If they decide that they don't want to work here, they want to work somewhere else, they have that ability to sort of move around. So that's the biggest one that I had in my head. The other thing,
hold on, Commissioner, can we just, and that's on my list too. So Commissioner Stebbins, do you raise your hand? Because it would be great if anybody could say, oh, I hate that, because ultimately we're not voting, but we're just sort of, gaining consensus so that we can begin that writing process, because we will obviously have an opportunity to vote. So go ahead, Commissioner Stebbins, and then Commissioner Camargo.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I want to thank my colleague for bringing this up. This was another topic that I heard a lot about at the CBA roundtable just on Friday. It's around badging. It is around how an individual could go through a process to position themselves for employment, being able to take that accreditation, that suitability, and walk into an employer and say, basically, I'm ready to go. So just to pick up on that, I don't know whether, I'm sure staff will weigh in and tell us whether this is low-hanging fruit or not, but just to share those concerns that I heard from the roundtable on Friday.
Commissioner Camargo?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to clarify at this point in the meeting, are you wanting to talk about low-hanging fruit? One, just because I'm looking at this agenda here that's up on the screen, and I don't think it matches today's meeting. But also, I just want to sort of think process, because I'm sure you're aware, Madam Chair, I did speak to Mike Baker, and I sort of asked him about what's the timeline? When is it that if we have low-hanging fruit, we have to direct our staff to start working on it for us, to then bring it back to either the first July meeting or the second July meeting, so that we can kind of vote on it and say, hey, this is what we want to submit to the Secretary of State. So I'm curious if I don't know if you're expecting to talk about low-hanging fruit today, or are you trying to get a consensus?
That's what I think we're doing. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing now. I thought that I thought that I'd said that to you in an email when you were asking what we were talking about today. So if I wasn't clear, sorry, I apologize.
No. I think you're clear. I'm just thinking, I'm just being very visual because I'm following the agenda. So I just wanted to know where were we in steps for today's meeting? So that's what I was sort of asking, like, and I didn't know if you were going to sort of talk a little bit about the actual timeline, because we're always talking as commissioners, but we also sometimes don't realize the impact behind the scenes for our staff members that they need the time to prepare. So I didn't know if you wanted to start with sort of the timeline of what needs to happen in the next 3 weeks for low-hanging fruit to sort of actually become real, so that we can submit it. Does that make sense, Madam Chair?
Yes. What I'm trying to do is to sort of gain consensus of what I consider some of the simplest things that we can do, either to provide relief for patients, for industry, for social equity, and that it is the path of least resistance, so that our staff that is already burdened right now, working with the 3 municipal groups. But we know that the industry in crisis, we know that there are some simple things that we can fix. And so this is really the commission discussion, although we're not taking a vote. It's really just to have a conversation in open meeting so that we can get a small list that isn't going to, make people jump off a bridge on the staff to get this done. And I'm hoping that it can be done in parallel. We may not be able to get it done, but that it can be done in parallel, or at least along a similar time frame of our municipal equity. One of the things that I hope that we can do as a commission is, rather than opening regulations every couple of years, that especially right now, because we see the industry in crisis, we see the fact that we have not met our social equity mission and only have 50, social equity commence operation licensees right now. So we know that there is much that we can and should be doing to both keep the promise of social equity, but also to understand the crushing burden that many licensees are facing right now. So I feel like this is something ongoing that we should be constantly looking at regs, seeing how they can be flexibly amended to create a better, environment for all the stakeholders we have. So in terms of the time frame, if we have 2 items that come out of this that provide some relief, I'm hoping we can do that. So if I could just sort of, does anybody here not think that Commissioner Concepcion's agent registration, single badging is a bad idea? And I would love our executive director maybe to weigh in as well. But does anybody here think this is a bad idea, that we should not have our staff taking a look at this? Okay, I don't see anybody. Director Collins, do you have any thoughts on that? Again, we know that this is a commission issue, but commissioner issue, but in terms of resources, we just want to make sure that we're not overburdening people as well.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, commissioners. Nice to see you all. This is an idea that has been discussed at different intervals throughout the history of our regulations. It might have been contemplated, at the early aspect of developing the legal scheme and the industry's workforce development process. A few practical things to consider, and please don't interpret this in any way as being opposed at all. Instead, it's just more the things we have to consider on our end, which is currently in our agent registration process, we do not conduct the background check. We do not conduct the query. That is done by the employer. And so that would be a shift. We'd have to think about what that looks like for us as an agent submitting an application to the commission, who then goes and runs the query. And obviously we would want to be sensitive to that information as we contain it to ensure that we are protecting it as data as well. We do have an obligation there. The other thing that's been considered in both locally in our jurisdiction, but also across the country, is who has the wherewithal and the ability to actually manage that process for themselves, who would have access, for instance, to either come forward with their query, and are we creating a potential inadvertent barrier, or creating an advantage for some folks to come forward, register themselves. If there's a fee attached to that, who is more likely to pay that fee on their own versus the employer covering it? So maybe there's a way to consider either a hybrid or some sort of fee reduction, fee waiver. That might be again a possibility there. So there's some back end things we'd have to consider, but again, please don't interpret that as being opposed. Outside of these are the things we'd have to just consider and wrestle with.
Commissioner Concepcion.
Thank you. And hello, Mr. Executive Director. It's good to see you again.
Likewise.
Congratulations. Welcome.
Thank you.
You said something that made me think about when I was at the district attorney's office and the way that they handled bar renewals. So it's just, I'm throwing this out. I haven't fully thought this through, but you made me think about the way that certain employers sponsored the bar renewals. Even though that was attached to the individual, and I still went home and I'm licensed as an individual, as an attorney, it was sponsored by that employer. So maybe I'm thinking about what you're saying about in terms of hybrid, and it just made me think of that sort of hybrid approach too. So that's just what my mind thought. I wanted to share that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if anybody else, but this is also, if we gain consensus, it appears we have consensus, although we haven't taken a vote. And so what this does is we say to our staff, you figure out how low this is. Okay, how low and how simple is this to accomplish? Is this one of the hopefully quicker fixes that we can create now that can hopefully, you know, be done later in the fall into early winter, or is it not? So we will, so let us put that on our list for our staff to sort of assess whether or not, you know, this is doable in an extremely short period of time, or if it requires a little bit more thinking about hybrid as the director. Commissioner Concepcion, do you have any other thoughts that you wanted to throw into the conversation about low-hanging fruit? I got to come up with another term. I'm so sick of saying low-hanging fruit. Somebody come up with another term.
You'll learn I'm terrible with low-hanging fruit because there are other things that are in my mind that I know would not be, like, our positive impact plans. That's another conversation, but I will talk about that. So that's the only thing that I went through that is legitimately a priority of mine that I think is low hanging fruit.
Can I say, towards the end of this conversation, I'd like to get into things like that because, you know, especially as it pertains, from my perspective, testing and looking, you know, we may want to, I'd like to put in place additional working groups that can be looking at some of these much needed and more complicated issues, but maybe towards the end of the summer, appoint some of those working groups to start looking at the things that are a little bit more complex, that may require a little bit more stakeholder listening and thinking about, rather than, yep, we think that this is it, and dot the I's and cross the T's and get it done. So thank you. So do you have anything else that you wanted to throw out there, Commissioner Concepcion?
No.
Nope. Commissioner Camargo?
Well, 2 to 1 if you didn't already say that, but I feel like that was already discussed at length last time. Yes.
Yeah, 2 driver. We have a consensus on that. So we think that we can get that in motion and get that drafted. So thank you. Commissioner Margot, do you have any ones that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I submitted my list to Mike Baker, but I can go through, I think, one, Madam Chair, or actually, let me see, 1, 2.
If you could just talk to us, because obviously this is the limitation that we have, because you've submitted it to Mike, but then I get like tied up because I'm not supposed to, just so people know, I see a list and I literally can't see who said it because of the open meeting prohibition. And so this is where you can kind of pierce the veil here and kind of tell us what you're thinking. So that would be great.
I appreciate that. Thank you for that background. It's always helpful. Madam Chair, I think what I think would be sort of a low-hanging fruit. I'm going to help you think of another name.
Yeah, thank you.
But the 2 ID check when you're walking into a retail location. We check IDs at the front door, and there is a person they have hired, whether a security guard, whether an employee who's trained to check those IDs as soon as you walk in the door. And then there is a second person, or at the register, for lack of better words, you're carded again. I think taking out the second ID check, which is when you're about to purchase, I think will be helpful to the industry. I think it'll save them some time, some money, and also just process. So that's my one of my top low-hanging fruit. So up for discussion.
Could I ask the executive director to sort of, because why do we have, none of us were here, you know, I don't disagree that it's redundant. And my sense is that the director may understand why that was put in place in the first place, unless, as you know, I've talked to some of the original commissioners, they over-regulated, understanding that they could scale back as opposed to under-regulating and then having to claw back later. So if the director could maybe give us his thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. It's a security feature, one that I want to say could be not a holdover, but a harken back to the existence of the medical program where someone's patient status had to be confirmed, but then double checked against the allotted 60-day supply. And so they might be identified at the door. I apologize, the reference is the man trap that someone would enter, which is the door latches behind you, it latches in front of you, your ID is checked, you may then advance through. But then again, it was reconciled at the sales counter to ensure that, again, it's the individual before you that is presenting, and then secondly, to check against the 60-day allotment and just continuing that theme, knowing that a lot of our licensees are going to be co-located. And then again, a patient could be either in the adult use sales line or a dedicated medical sales line. So there is redundancy to it, but it was intended originally as both a data reconciliation and an enhanced security feature. Reminder that, and Commissioner Camargo didn't allude to this, but that front first ID check is also to confirm that everyone in a sales floor or on location is 21 or older. Again, that's not to include patients that might be minors, or not minors, but 18 and up, but they would be accompanied by a caregiver as well. So, but again, that's at least my recollection is it harkens back to the medical days.
So can you just sort of opine or give us a little bit of?
Carefully, sure. The redundancy, I think, is obvious. I don't know that it's a huge burden from a cost standpoint. It obviously does take time for someone to reconcile the ID, but that's really I wouldn't want to opine myself much further beyond whatever the commission's intent is. I don't see a glaring security breach in any way, knowing that ID check occurs at the point of entry. That should be sufficient, so long as again the licensees are compliant there.
Okay. Does anyone have any significant go ahead, Commissioner Roy.
I just need some edification. Are we saying eliminate it at the door, or keep it at the door and eliminate it at the point of sale? I don't know what's happening.
I think that there's a real reason why we have to have it at the door under the current, I think even statutory framework, but I'm not sure. But anyway, it's at point of sale. So basically, you've assured that person is over 21 or has a caregiver that's over 21, and so that's how they get in. And then having to do it again at point of sale is redundant. So I think we're looking at point of sale. Yes, Commissioner Camargo, I think that's what we're saying. So unless anybody really hates this, let's put it in the tentative pile, and then go ahead, Commissioner Concepcion.
I like this suggestion. I like it for a different reason that I will not amplify too much right now, but because of the way that it's utilized, the information, who's tracking what and how purchases are done. So I think that is a valuable conversation to be had. Okay, so we will put that into the tentative pile, and we will ask our staff to, and again, we will be working with our legal team, with Mike Baker and Mercedes to kind of cull this list to determine what the sort of final list is. Anything else, Commissioner Camargo, that you want to add? Any other ideas?
I do. I mean, do you want me to go down my list, Madam Chair?
Please, yeah, please,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, this one I'm not sure.
Helpful. I think it's also helpful because you've been talking. I think it's also helpful to let the public know what we're all thinking. So I think that's helpful. Yeah.
Not a problem. I just want to sort of say this before kind of moving forward that I don't know. I'll just throw them out there, but I know that our legal team was also going to look at them to see how viable they were for low-hanging fruit. But I'll just throw the next one that I have up here is I've met with a lot of economic empowerment applicants, and 5 years in, for economic empowerment applicants that are already operating and are licensees, we continue to call them applicants. So really here it's a sort of a name change, and I don't know if this is statutory or it's in our regs, which is why, hence me saying our legal team has to review this. It's maybe thinking of sort of renaming economic empowerment applicants that have already commenced operation. So maybe economic empowerment operator or economic empowerment licensee. I think it gives it a more a graduating sort of name versus continuing to call them economic empowerment applicants.
Is this anything that requires a change, or do we just have to normalize it?
I think we just have to normalize it. But again, our legal team could probably tell us a little more. But that's one thing. That's another thing, Madam Chair.
Okay, if I can just ask, and I don't, Sean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but my sense is this may not require any change. It's just how we frame it.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Camargo. As I'm actually in the regs now, so I apologize. I guess I'd have to read through the regs and see where we reference it, and if there's a way, I think Commissioner Camargo, to your point, to quote normalize it or to just identify it. I think we'd want to be careful. There is a statutory reference to the applicant themselves. We want to preserve that. At the same time, once someone does become both an active licensee, and then I think and it continues to progress toward operations, there might just be a way to designate that, knowing that they may also apply for other licenses and therefore simultaneously be both an applicant and an operator. And I wouldn't want to confuse us, the public, or them, the entity, too much. So as we read through the regs, we can look for opportunities to identify a change like that and sort of a margin note as to what that would be, the purpose of that. So it should be easy enough. I don't see any reason to not do it. It's just a matter of labels.
Okay, so we can get an answer on that, and then we'll determine whether or not this, it seems to me this should be truly low-hanging fruit unless it requires a statutory change. But that's also something that I want us to be thinking about, you know, as a group, which is if there are some statutory changes, you know, we now have you know, we probably want to engage our legislative partners. I just met with Representative Consalvo, who is new to the Cannabis Oversight Committee in the House. By the way, he actually would like to meet with all of the individual commissioners as he's kind of onboarding and learning about the issues. But you know, in addition to you know, the Senate and the House folks that a lot of us have talked to, you know, I know that there are people there who do want to help us make statutory changes. So, you know, that also might be something that folks can be thinking about. So, Commissioner Camargo, do you have anything else you want to continue going through your list? And I apologize,
Yeah, sure.
the train's going by here. I'm going to put this on mute because it's really loud. So,
yeah, sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think, and to my colleagues, I think that the other one, like micro businesses having the ability to own another license, I think is another conversation. I don't know how low-hanging fruit these are. I know that Commissioner Stebbins and Commissioner Roy have discussed a little bit about micro businesses, but I also wanted to discuss third-party transporters. Commissioner Stebbins and I met with them last week. We've been meeting with them. Can we just
let's just sort of deal one at a time, just to sort of gain that consensus.
Yeah. Let me finish my comment.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah. I was kind of just giving you a little bit of background. So the third-party transporters, like I was saying, Commissioner Stebbins and I have been meeting with them for probably about 1.5 years now, and sort of having conversation, getting to know the third-party transport business, and sort of you know, their challenges as well. But what I was sort of alluding to, I know that micro businesses, we are talking about allowing them to own another license. So I wanted to say that also we need to look at third-party transporters, allowing them to own other licenses as well. They do not have the ability right now to own other licenses. So I don't know how low of a hanging fruit that is to my colleagues, but I wanted to sort of put it out there for conversation and understand the impact as well on that. And I don't know if our executive director has historical information on that, but that's another one, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Director Collins, if you want to just sort of provide a little bit. I mean, that was actually micro businesses, you know, one of the things that I was concerned about. And I know Commissioner Roy was also concerned about that. So maybe sort of talk about in general the whys, but also, you know, whether or not this is simple or not.
Yeah, and this has been a discussion for some time now. I should also acknowledge it originates from micro businesses that are expanding or growing or looking, frankly, to take on new investments so that they may expand even within the confines of a micro business, knowing that a micro business license authorizes, well, it may authorize both cultivation and product manufacturing. Some micro businesses are choosing to prioritize one over the other, hoping that expansion or growth over time can now lead to either adding product manufacturing as an element or adding the cultivation as an element. We also do authorize, if the licensee is otherwise eligible, being either a EEA or SEP, that they may also deliver with that micro business and delivery endorsement. At the same time, that in theory, it is somewhat simple to just imagine the ability of a micro business to convert its licenses or its license to either a standalone cultivation and or a standalone product manufacturing. What would need to be considered in that, or the ability, excuse me, of a micro business to own any other license type, would need to be how does the commission consider a micro business against that 3 license cap? So micro business being a combined cultivation and product manufacturing, knowing that any individual or entity may only enjoy ownership or control over 3 of each license type: cultivation, product manufacturing, and retail. How does a micro business, which is combined, factor into that cap? That's the only, I say in theory, it is simple. That's the rub that we would just need to come up with a solution for. So again, it's not to suggest we shouldn't do it or couldn't do it. It's just a matter of the simplicity may not be what everybody imagines or believes it is. And we could obviously take a draft or a crack at some recommendation for the commission to consider, but that would be the, not a holdup, but instead just something to consider.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a comment on that, or is anybody opposed? Go ahead, Commissioner Roy.
Well, that was I don't want to jump ahead because I don't want to, if Commissioner Camargo still has more. Okay. That is my
Commissioner Roy, I do, but please jump into this because I think we're
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of go
Thank you.
topic, keep
Yeah.
it within the topic, because a
So
lot of
to
this, some of
me,
this is overlapping, so.
Yeah, so this low-hanging fruit is super ripe. So it's my number 1 priority to help these folks. I've had an opportunity to meet with so many micro businesses that are really, really struggling. They can't scale. They can't get investors. So we had met, Commissioner Stebbins and myself had met with Executive Director Collins and Director Potvin and talked about removing the line from 550 10B, where a micro business license may not be a person or entity having direct or indirect control for any other marijuana establishment except social consumption. So removing that line, but they're also limited because they have to be a Massachusetts resident. And I understand why it was put in at the time, because you didn't want out-of-state folks, applying for this license type. But if we're going to allow them to scale, do we consider removing that as well? Because every other license type can have out-of-state folks. So just another thought along that license type. Do we leave that language in if we opt to amend this license?
Commissioner Stebbins?
Sure. Just to weigh in on this topic, it was on my fruit list. I'm 6'2", 6'3", so I can reach a little higher into the tree when we're talking about low-hanging fruit.
No short jokes.
but-
No short jokes.
And actually, I learned how to apple pick the correct way when I was a kid, so I'm all over this.
Twist.
Exactly, twist and don't put your fingerprints on. We've talked about it. I credit our licensing team. I think they've been thinking through this. I think it's important for us to address. We've talked about the fact that allowing a micro business who is successful, who wants to grow and take that next step, we're essentially cutting off their cash flow when we tell them that they have to surrender their license. So I know it's not just an easy task of changing some language, because there are other pieces of it, as we're just talking about, that are kind of scattered throughout our regulations. But I think both the licensing and our legal team have looked at this issue. And I think we need to also answer the question of, if I'm a micro business and let's say I get a cultivation license or a product manufacturing license or even a retail license, that some of those benefits carried by a micro business may not extend to whatever that new license type is. So it is, in my mind, low-hanging fruit, but I think we need to just understand some of those other intricacies around what that change would mean. But I completely support it, adding it to the list.
Okay, so it appears we have consensus here. Again, we'll let the staff kind of direct just how low all this stuff is. So Commissioner Camargo, do you want to continue with your options?
Yeah, thank you. And Madam Chair, I want to clarify that are we adding both third-party transporter license ownership and micro business to that list? We talked about two topics.
Again, that's what I'm just trying to go. Sure, I think that we're looking at the first one, and that's why I just want to go topic by topic, and when that's where I was getting a little bit. I want to make sure that we have consensus. So I guess we can. Does anyone have any issue, about the delivery? I mean, why don't you just explain the second topic a little bit more, because I've really focused on the micro and I haven't focused on that as much. So why don't you just share with us that?
Yeah. The first topic I talked about was the third-party transporters, allowing them to own an extra license. Whether they want them or can afford them at this point, I don't know, but it's the option. I was just doing sort of the correlation to micro businesses as well, because I know it was on the agenda, or I know it's on topic. So really, that is, I think, like Commissioner Stebbins' point. I think this one could be low-hanging fruit, but also I think we have to understand the impact for it and kind of dive down a little bit deeper into third-party transporters as well. But I would like to add it to the list. I think similar to micro business.
Okay. All right. So unless there's any significant pushback on this, I think that there's consensus again that we're all looking to make this these different license options workable for licensees. So let's add that. So do you want to continue with your list?
Sure. And I feel bad because I have a couple of, but I hope that we have enough time so that my colleagues can. Okay.
Again, that's what this is for. So
okay. So this one is around the third-party transporters as well, and I can. All of you, I think all of us got an email from them maybe 2 meetings ago with a couple of things that we could look at. One thing, and I think Commissioner Stebbins, I think you were a part of this conversation as well last week, was that third-party transporters, the amount of paper that they use and the amount of waste when it comes to paper in terms of manifests is a thing. And they estimate that a single transportation truck generates 1 inch of paperwork in the form of manifests each month. A fleet of 12 trucks accumulates a foot of paperwork each month. This unnecessary accumulation of paperwork could be significantly reduced if these records could be stored, transferred electronically, and a single hard copy manifest be required for transportation. And we have some suggested language, which all of you have this document because it was sent to all of us. I just happen to have it. So that's something else. I think that's very low-hanging fruit. But again, I don't, we would have to understand the operations of it and vice versa. Commissioner Stebbins, I don't know if you have any thoughts or want to add anything to this one.
Sure. Thank you. It's and it may not just apply to our third-party transporters, and it may just need some clarification around record keeping. I don't know if there's an assumption on behalf of our licensees that when they see record keeping, it's all about keeping something in a paper form, or whether we can begin to work with licensees about how they may be able to store record keeping, virtually. But certainly this topic came up in terms of how a manifest could be transmitted, how it could be more effectively saved for record keeping, so it's available to our investigators if we ever need to look through any documentation. But certainly it's around some efficiencies and maybe even moving with technology into the 21st century. But looks like a simple tweak that could save us some time and effort on behalf of our licensees.
Is there anybody from legal or licensing or investigations who might kind of join this conversation or give us a little bit of context on this, or Executive
Or we can
Director
follow.
Collins?
Yeah.
I just didn't know if there's, I mean, again, just while we're sort of all here, if anybody can provide us with some, Director Collins, do you have any thoughts on this?
I'm gonna have to, I think, explore this a little bit with our team. I guess just to thinking about the third-party transport, we do have, there is a license type that is an existing licensee with a third-party transport. So I'm not sure as to why licensees feel as though they can't have another license with a third-party transport license when it is explicitly authorized by regulations to do so. So I want to explore
Sean.
that a little bit to understand. Sure, Commissioner.
Sean, I'm sorry. I think Madam Chair, clarify, but Sean, I think we were asking you about the paper piece, the paper trail.
I understand.
Oh.
But I'm thinking specifically of that as
Got it.
I hadn't had a chance to opine on your original topic.
Got it.
So I was returning to that as a general premise. But
Got
on
it, my
the
bad.
paper piece, I think Commissioner Stebbins' point, there is a records retention is, there might be a need for wet signatures is my suspicion. And that may be the impetus for that. But in 2023, I would imagine there's a way to do this a bit more sophisticated if possible, or a bit more flexible. But again, I'd want to be able to, I guess, check in with our team that lives this versus putting my thumb on the scale prematurely.
Are you saying is so that there's a potential that there might be a need for wet signatures that might be statutory as opposed to regulatory?
No, I'm thinking it could be regulatory.
Okay.
But
All right.
what I'm saying is that in practice today, we do know that when things are weighed and things are reconciled, that there needs to be both the agent that does it plus a witness, and obviously the way that you would document or memorialize that would be through a signature-based log, and that could be the paperwork aspect of that. So
Yeah. Okay.
I just want to take this offline with our team and understand better myself.
So Commissioner Kamara, I mean, I will just make the broad statement that any reduction in paperwork that does not compromise the public's health or safety, I'm for. So I agree with this. I don't know if there's a consensus here, but I think that that's something that we should at least ask our staff to look at and to give us a response as to what would prevent us from doing this. So we'll leave it at that, Commissioner Camargo, or do you want to make another comment on this topic?
No, I think that's good. I just want to, I have a few other things, and I think, Madam Chair, what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to yield to my colleagues just because I want to be mindful. And I think that this is the first conversation. I'm happy to kind of follow up on a few other things. I will say I want to make sure that kind of going back to clarifying the third-party transporters. I think, Sean, you mentioned the existing licenses. I think there's a lot of interesting things happening within the third-party transporter that now, after 5 years, I think it's time for us to do sort of a check-in of third-party transporters in terms of the licensee. And I'm going to find the email that they all sent to us about 2-3 months ago. They did a very comprehensive one-pager, the Massachusetts Association of Cannabis Transporters. And it's very interesting to have met with them and just listen to some of the nuances of the operation pieces that I think we could be helpful to those licensees as well. So I want to just make sure that that gets on the list. I guess it may not be as low hanging fruit, but us allowing them to have extra licenses could be low hanging fruit. So I want to just make sure that if people are okay with that going on the list to sort of kind of start doing the research. And then, so Madam Chair, I just want clarification on that.
All I'm trying to do is to find, if someone says, I absolutely think we shouldn't be doing that, then that's not consensus. And
Okay.
So let's put that on the list. You want to just quickly continue, or just anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted the one I wanted to just add, the last one I'll add, and then again, I'll yield. Obviously, I think, Madam Chair, we're all aware of the 3 decisions that we need to make at the end of the year with virtual community meetings, telehealth, curbside pickup. I'm all for those getting on the list sooner rather than later. Obviously, we have the 2-driver rule. I think all of us are on the same page around that. I think at this point, maybe not. Let me not speak for other folks. But also just thinking about testing labs and thinking right now to prevent lab shopping. Do we need to create new regs and protocols that require one full panel of testing at one lab? So I don't know how low hanging fruit that is, but
So can I, if I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm just saying, this is actually, I would like to put together a working group on testing. And I think that there's a lot. And so, while I do think there are some conversations that I've had with the executive director and with Jim Kosis and Geneve, who are, manage our testing oversight program. We're looking to find some low-hanging fruit that can be done without regulation. For instance, the term getting stuck in metric jail. When there is a glitch in information, or perhaps an error in putting in information, and then things get stuck. So on the one hand, we're looking to see, are there some changes that we can make internally that reduce the burden on some licensees. We don't like to see their product being held up for months when, perhaps a simple adjustment can be made. But I do think that we need to more seriously look at broadly testing, setting standards, concerned about a number of different issues. So that is one of the things I'd like us to, a little bit later in the summer, put together another working group on that to look at testing. So in going back to, I think we have consensus on the 2-driver. I'm not, I would tell you, I still have some questions about curbside delivery, but one of my issues was extended allowing telehealth for that initial consult. And I think that was what you just raised. That's on my list as well. And I, want to see if anybody else might, have any reaction, positive or negative to. I think that we've extended this a couple of times. We extended this through the end of this year. But this would be one that I would like us to consider putting on the low-hanging fruit, unless anybody here has any significant pushback on that, including our executive director. But does anyone have any thoughts about the telehealth and making that sort of policy that we have going forward? Director Collins, do you have any sort of thoughts or concerns about that?
No, man. Well, I guess I want to say no, but yes. The only concern I would raise, and it's not a concern, again, not to be interpreted as opposed, is just that we somewhere identify or acknowledge that the telehealth standard of practice is not governed by the commission per se, but instead by the governing bodies of those providers. So be it the Board of Nursing or the Board of Registration of Medicine, for instance, that we can just harken back or reference those standards. I just want to set an expectation that it's something that we do govern, although, of course, I think COVID has proven its value and utility in a healthcare space. So outside of that, it seems like it's been for our patients a success, and I want to be sure that our providers see it as a standard of practice, though, not just a casual authorization.
So if I could suggest, unless anyone has any pushback, the extension of the telehealth. I personally I don't know enough about the curbside delivery. That to me, that's a little bit more in-depth thinking that we have to do as a commission. So I'd suggest that not be on the low-hanging fruit. But and while we're here looking at telehealth and looking at those standards, and I believe that we've talked about it, but adding, changing the language so that nurse practitioners do not have to consult with a physician when they don't have to consult with physicians to, prescribe opiates, So I don't know if there's any pushback on extending that ability to nurse practitioners to prescribe medical cannabis without having to get the approval of a doctor or physician. Does anybody have any pushback or negative feeling about that? Okay, so we can put the nurse practitioners. Oh, Commissioner Roy, go ahead.
No, just back to the telehealth. I don't foresee a problem with it as low-hanging fruit. Have we surveyed our patients? Do we we had that statistic, right, Sean, where how many were utilizing telehealth?
I would have to revisit that data, but it was a significant percentage as far as the initial visit. I just don't want to give you bad information.
Okay, and then on curbside, I still have questions, just to put a pin in that. And then on the virtual community outreach meeting, I have questions on that. So I don't know if that's low hanging fruit.
Could you explain that?
Yeah, so for virtual meetings,
Hold on a second. Hold on 1 second. Just sorry, Commissioner Roy. Commissioner Camargo, have we come to at least the end of your initial list here? And can I move on to Commissioner Roy? Stepped away. Okay, Commissioner Roy, sorry, you have the floor. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Is that okay?
Thanks, Commissioner Camargo. All right, go ahead, Commissioner Roy, sorry.
Okay, with the virtual community outreach meetings, I understand why they were put in place during the pandemic. I just have questions making that permanent. I know a hybrid would be great. Just folks, I think of my mother, I think of her building. A lot of seniors don't have access to, wouldn't even know how to log into a virtual meeting, but they would know how to go to the town hall to go to a meeting. So I just have questions. I don't know if that's necessarily, we have populations that don't have access to online. So I just want to talk more about the virtual community outreach meeting when it's time. That's all I want to say.
But so is this something you'd like to add, subtract?
No, I'm just saying
thinking?
we have three things that we extended, and I think we're kind of all in agreement on telehealth. And I think I heard that you have questions on curbside. I have questions on curbside, and I just have questions around disproportionately impacted folks that can't access a meeting virtually. And you know, I just want to talk about. I don't know if that's low hanging fruit, the virtual meeting and the curbside, but the other one seems to be.
So the curbside, I again, I think that requires a little bit more digging into it.
Yeah,
Maybe a
I
working group or a small working group, or that can be, we can find a bundle. So maybe what we have here is we figure out a working group on those two particular issues, but we have consensus around the telehealth for the initial concept.
And I just want to say that for the virtual community, they should stay remote in some capacity, but are they exclusively remote? You're going to disenfranchise some folks. That's all I'm trying to say with that community outreach meeting. So that if we can put a working group, that would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you. So let's a consensus that we have a small working group that can be looking at those two sort of COVID era issues. Go ahead, Commissioner Camargo.
Commissioner Roy, do you think that and I'm just thinking, because I hear what you're saying. I agree. There's some folks who don't have access to internet, or even our elders, or folks that, you know, all kinds of folks. But could it be where we think about giving it as a sort of like a dual thing where they're virtually but also in person?
That's what I'm thinking. Dual, dual. That's what I'm thinking. Yes.
Yeah,
dual.
like allowing it to continue to be virtual, but then also in person. I mean, cities and towns may say, well, virtual is much easier for us, but I think us allowing them to do it hybrid.
Yeah.
Can I tell you, it's really not that much of a burden on the municipalities. It's really a burden on the applicants. You know, they're oftentimes allowed to use. I know that in my hometown, and I think I've mentioned a couple of times, you know, Whitman last year approved, had opposed cannabis licenses in the community, and then last year the town meeting approved it. And I believe that we had in-person meeting in the town hall, but it's up to the licensee or the applicant to facilitate that. So while there's a burden, and there's a recognition that the community has to say, yes, you have done the virtual meeting or you've done the in-person meeting. They're not necessarily running it. They're saying you checked the box correctly. So just to kind of understand that. Go ahead, Commissioner Wright.
Yeah, I just feel that and I agree with you, Commissioner Camargo, a combination is, I think, you're going to exclude folks if it's just virtual. Some people just don't have access to internet. I know people that, you know what I mean? It's like, so this way, people that can't make it in person would have the option to view it virtually. And for those that don't have internet would have the option to be able to go. So that's all.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Commissioner Camargo.
Commissioner Roy, I agree. I was just thinking, how do we not have to create a working group around this so that it's one less thing that we have to create a working group for, and maybe talk about it being hybrid, right? So that was just my thought, Chairwoman. Yep. Was, do we need a working group for it, or can we kind of say, hey, it needs to, you guys have the option to do it hybrid? So that was it.
Yeah, I think that as we kind of walk through some of these municipal regs, we can take a little bit more time to think about it, internalize it. I don't think that we're precluded from doing something like that. And I just wanted to point out that it's really not necessarily a burden on the municipalities. It's really so, let's put a hold on this so we can have some additional, time to absorb. But I think that we all understand, because we voted twice now to extend telehealth. We kind of know what we're doing there. So, Commissioner Roy, do you have other? I know. Go ahead.
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. Today, from low-hanging fruit, I'm hopeful. Reciprocity. I just want to talk a little bit about reciprocity. So right now, for medical patients out of state, unless it's end-of-life care, we don't recognize their medical card. And for Massachusetts, a patient from another state cannot just come into an MTC with their medical cards, but states that recognize our medical cards are Arizona, Arkansas, Hawaii, Maine, Michigan, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Puerto Rico, Rhode Island, Utah, and Washington, and the list is growing. So I believe Executive Director Collins, I believe the previous commissioners during a public meeting kind of changed the definition of qualifying patient, if I have my history correct here, and then they added end of life or palliative care. So I don't see, if that was the case and that was done during, live in a meeting, I'm hopeful that we could recognize out-of-state medical patients with reciprocity. If they were able to do it in a meeting, I'm hopeful we could do the same along recognizing out-of-state. So I don't know your thoughts about that.
So Director Collins, does this require a regulatory change, or is this an internal policy that we can, I know that we provide exemptions, so can we do this?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm following the adding palliative care as a qualifying condition. I'm not sure how that translates to reciprocity necessarily. At the same time,
they were out-of-state cards, so those were out-of-state.
They're not out-of-state cards.
They're not out-of-state cards?
They're out-of-state residents that are living
That's what
in
I mean, out-of-state
residents.
I'm sorry, out-of-state. We allow out-of-state residents that way.
To register with our program and then become Massachusetts patients. That's correct. So that's the, and I'm again, it's at most devil's advocate. If nothing else, I'm just trying to identify some of the either hurdles, questions, or things that need to be considered. As for reciprocity, I'm not sure if it is regulatory or if it is statutory. I guess I'd want to explore it because to the Commissioner Roy's point, other jurisdictions do extend this benefit to our residents and our patients. And obviously this would be a business opportunity for our MTCs, knowing too that Massachusetts is a tourism center. And we do have patients that may be from out of state visiting the Commonwealth, be it the Berkshires or the Cape or frankly, any region of the Commonwealth. And knowing that one of the challenges of locating an MTC in some areas of the Commonwealth is business, insufficient business. This may be, I hate to think of patients as a business opportunity, just to be mindful of the awkwardness of that. At the same time, if it makes our MTCs more viable for our patients, as far as access is concerned, there might be value there. So again, I'd want to take this as a topic to explore a bit. If there is a possibility to do it regulatory wise, I don't see it as being a major drafting hurdle all that much. It's just a matter of how do we articulate it, and then how do we implement it with our licensees to ensure that we can verify an out-of-state patient's registration. And so again, this is a benefit that other jurisdictions extend to our patients. So fair is fair. And I just want to make sure we have the legal authority to do it either through regulations or if necessary to identify what that pathway looks like.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Commissioner Roy, you want?
Yes, and some of these could be guidance. I just want to preface that, but the definition of responsible vendor trainer. I'd like to add, I know we recognize SCP, DBE, EEA. Just like to recognize a big part of what we do is encourage supplier diversity. You see it time and time again in our positive impact plans from the licensees that they're going to contract with suppliers that are registered as OSD certified, and we don't do it. We don't do it for our RVT vendors. We approve them, but we don't recognize them as OSD certified. So I'd like to recognize them formally as OS. If they are, we have veteran-owned RVT. We have a minority-owned RVT or in DBE. So I don't know if we can add it to the definition. The commission shall recognize those that are OSD certified, or if there's some way, and it really should be on it. I mean, every registered agent has to take RVT. And if we have some that are OSD certified, then I guess unless they're not plant touching, right, Sean? Then they don't have to take it. But I'd like to be able to recognize them as, you know, we highly encourage it for folks to use vendors that are OSD certified. So I would like to in some way maybe increase the definition of responsible vendor training, or recognize them in some way on our website. So when folks go to pick them.
Is this a website issue, or is this a regulation issue? It sounds like it's a little bit like we can just say EE instead of EEA, or do we have to change something? I mean, do we have to change something here?
No, Madam Chair. So I indicated maybe in the May public meeting, we're doing this. The first step, of course, was we've had a number of requests historically over time to do this. My first priority was ensuring that we are both accurate and fair in doing this. And so how do we identify and confirm that an entity both is in fact, but also how do we extend this opportunity or invitation to every RVT vendor to ensure that we don't just put one on our website that says this is veteran-owned, minority-owned, women-owned. And so that survey is something we need to first do. I don't envision this taking a long time because we don't have a glut of RVT vendors. So it can be done with relatively short order, but we are going to do this. We are doing this. And so if there's a way to memorialize that in regulation, I don't see any harm in doing that. And again, I'd want to rely upon or really lean into our relationship with the Supplier Diversity Office, as we are not best equipped or frankly well equipped to be confirming whether or not a business is truly women-owned, veteran-owned, or minority-owned. And then, of course, I do know that there's perhaps a dialogue about adding to the Supplier Diversity Office list, be it other classifications as well. So, but this is something that I think is relatively low. To your definition of low-hanging fruit, this will qualify.
Okay. All right.
Yep, and I just another one which probably is guidance, but while we're having this conversation is and Mr. Executive Director, you and I have spoken on this, the 72-hour rule, which is not really in reg, but and I understand why it was put in place to give patients enough notice to access their medicine before adult use was open. But if someone gets their commence ops on a Friday, they miss the whole weekend of potential sales. So is there a way to either compromise on this or eliminate it or scale it back some?
Director Collins, yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Sure. I think there's a lot to consider and reconsider as it pertains to the commence operations. That, to your point, Commissioner Roy, that was an administrative notice put in place at the beginning of adult use sales. The importance there was that our first 2 adult use sales locations were co-located medical licensees, Cultivate in Leicester and Netta in Northampton. And obviously wanted to be sure that we were prioritizing patient access, but also giving the community sufficient notice that within those 72 hours, the first 2 retail stores in the entire East Coast are going to be open. Prepare accordingly. And so that notice at that moment was, I think, vital and critical and important. Could it have now lived its useful purpose, perhaps? But I do think it is important, especially that communities have notice that there is going to be a facility opening. Now, granted, a cultivation facility commencing their operations should not be driving foot or public traffic by any means. However, a retailer may, and so there might be there's some business decision there, but we also know that cities and towns have the special permitting process and things like that, where they can control what transpires within their bounds. So I think it is worth visiting, but I think it's also noteworthy, and Commissioner Roy, you referenced this, that 72-hour window is not in regulation. And so therefore we might have some administrative ease in revisiting that, but also it may not be, I don't think it's beyond the Commission's authority to add something in regulation that clarifies what happens upon commence operation. So food for thought as far as how we could tackle that, but I don't think it's that difficult or inappropriate for that matter.
I don't sense any pushback on that. I think that this makes a lot of sense. And again, I think that communities through their own zoning process that they can and the fact that the police chief or commissioner has to sign off on security plans, that my sense is that there's enough local control to be able to manage something like that, even were it to be retail. And again, I think we're sort of beyond the days of, half-hour lines of people like they had in Northampton, my old neck of the woods. So if we can do this without changing the regs, that's great. And then if we think we need to clarify that, maybe it's guidance. So we can maybe put that on the list. And then we don't really necessarily have to worry about the timing on that. If it doesn't need a regulatory change, we could make that a thing, and then we can write, guidance at some point in time. So Commissioner Roy, anything else?
Yeah, and just mid to high level fruit before I.
High level fruit, we don't have that category.
I know, but I want to just kind of echo Commissioner Camargo around the labs and testing and magic wand type of thing. I'd love to codify potency, have uniform standards, and maybe we got to look at that a la carte rule, as Commissioner Camargo said, the a la carte rule where people are going here for their potency and here for their pesticides and here for their pathogens. Maybe we can kind of revisit that rule as well.
Thank you. Anything else you'd like to add to low hanging fruit?
I'm good right now, unless something else strikes me.
Okay. All right.
Thank
Let's have the treetop guy Stebbins give us his list.
I can just say ditto, and we can wrap it up. No. First of all, Chair, I want to thank you for engaging all of us in these kind of brainstorming policy sessions. I've certainly echoed in the past that when I came here, I didn't really understand this terminology of opening, time to open up the regs. I've always felt that if we saw issues that we needed to address, that we didn't need to wait for some calendar or window in which to address them. But thank you for putting this on the agenda. Thank you for giving us all the opportunity to weigh in. I'll just run through my list really quickly. Some of these we've already talked about. Obviously, the micro business is an important one, obviously, that we've heard a lot about. Again, I put that in that low-hanging fruit category, even though there's some intricacies we might need to just be mindful of as we look at those regs. I guess my first big one would be with respect to changing some language in 935 CMR 500.005. Right now, we prioritize review of licensing from minority women and veteran business enterprises as certified by the Mass Supplier Diversity Office. The SDO also certifies disabled veteran-owned businesses, disabled resident-owned businesses, LGBTQ-owned businesses, and even Portuguese-owned businesses. I would suggest changing the regulations to cover all businesses certified by the SDO. We are all already looking for business opportunities for the first three that I mentioned within our diversity plan guidance. Expanding the language to simply include those businesses that SDO certifies, I think would also protect us from having to come back and change our regulations in the future. Some of these business certification opportunities are really new and just added in the past few years under Governor Baker's administration. So I think it would allow us to open up the marketplace a little bit more, as well as save us or our successors some time and energy when it came to incorporating those changes into regulations in the future. Again, already touched on micro business.
I think that's a great idea. As a matter of fact, Commissioner Concepcion and I had actually asked our research team, because one of the groups that we haven't specifically listed in terms of priority is Indigenous people, Native Americans, and we actually asked our Dr. Julie Johnson to take a look at the disproportionate impact of that cohort during the war on drugs. But maybe this is something that simplifies that so that we're not adding individuals in it, and it makes it a little bit easier. I don't know if anybody else has any sort of feedback or comment on this. Hearing none, we can put that in the pile. And is there anything else that you have, Commissioner Stebbins, you'd like to add to our list?
Sure, just a couple more thoughts. And just as a reminder for folks who are listening, who might be that VBE or a woman-owned business, you haven't thought about certification. The SDO certification is a free program, but I think for us as a licensing entity, it really gives us some confidence that SDO goes in and really looks at who the ownership and management of one of these certified businesses is effectively managed by. So a plug for our friends at the SDO. Again, microbusiness, the piece about record keeping, Madam Chair, I think you raised the issue of the certified nurse practitioner's capacity and ability and authority. Happy to, I'd love to have that on our low-hanging fruit list. And echo my interest and concern also about the lab testing, and that might be a little more effort and workload to consider all the reg changes we might need with that, but I endorse that. Also, love to have a conversation at some point around badging. I think early on I visited a cultivator and was looking at the number of badges that an individual who worked for the same employer had to have, and how, when some of our smaller licensees need some help and want to pull somebody maybe off retail to come and help at the cultivation site because somebody's out sick or they're shorthanded. Again, that might be a longer discussion. I think probably the executive director has some thoughts around that. The last one.
Could I actually stop you there, Commissioner Stebbins?
Sure.
Because this is, allowing, for one badge rather than multiple badges, when someone's working for an entity that has multiple licenses. If Director Collins could maybe give us any sort of pushback, help us understand the potential complexity, that was on my list as well. So maybe you can sort of share with us for this sort of policy discussion, what your thoughts on the devil's advocacy here, what we need to be thinking about.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is a topic that I've heard from industry, licensees, et cetera, about really since the inception of our program. And it's a frustration of mine as well, which is never mind the bureaucracy of issuing the multiple badges, the waste of multiple badges, and it's burdensome, it's cumbersome. It is perhaps wasteful. I've always loved the idea and been curious about the potential of say just data feeds, like a QR code or something on one individual badge, which would then indicate which licenses you are in fact affiliated with. We do have a number of entities that enjoy multiple licenses, and so the ability, I think, to Commissioner Stebbins' point, to deploy your workforce as is necessary does give them additional flexibility. Historically, there have been different suitability tables for each license type, even for agents. And so I think upon reviewing suitability, if there's more synergy there and more overlap, perhaps it could become a bit more efficient. And knowing too that licenses that are contained within, say, one footprint and under one roof, that may be logical, but perhaps if the licenses were in different locations, different buildings, different communities, how that workforce can be deployed in a more versatile way, I think is worth considering. Also knowing that earlier today, we discussed the ability of an individual to control their own agent registration and how they might be attractive as an employee and how they could be versatile. It's worth exploring. Again, how it squares with the suitability table is something that we have to weigh and ensure that if we deem someone suitable for retail or for cultivation, does that translate to the other license type with these new standards? I believe that it would theoretically. But in the past, it did not.
So are we going to have to look at the suitability issue, which Commissioner Concepcion raised? Do we need to do that? Is that like the condition precedent to making this easy to do, or I don't know if I'm missing that.
I believe the suitability statutory change that was made as part of Chapter 180 will be positively impactful on this potential change, but it does need to be reviewed through that lens. Because again, in the past, retail was more restrictive than, say, cultivation. But if there's going to be now a clean suitability table for all license types, then the versatility of an agent registration is greater, and it would translate into making this potential change easier both on our end, but also on the employee and employer end. Again, I just want to acknowledge, I think the fact that multiple agent registrations. Agents are tied to licenses today. And so if the agent is tied to the individual moving forward, I think that this change becomes more appealing in our ability, and I would say even the necessity to employ data feeds, again, through QR code or some other technology that I don't understand, might be more attractive. And again, there might be some head spinning in our IT department right now, given that I'm talking out loud. But I think it's a productive exercise. The only reason we haven't necessarily, I shouldn't say gotten to it, but the reason that it hasn't happened is frankly bandwidth and our ability to tackle what's before us. But again, if we're in the regulation, so to speak, this would be a timely conversation.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Commissioner Stebbins, anybody want to add or to that? Commissioner Stebbins, do you have anything else you want, or Commissioner Roy, you have a question or you want to comment on that?
Well, I just have something I thought of only when Commissioner Stebbins is done.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay, Commissioner Stebbins.
Sure, and I'll be quick. I just have, one final thought and then one final change that I'd like us to think about. The change really revolves around advertising. Drive down Massachusetts highways, you see the billboards, all of the warnings that we require, I think would be tough for anybody to read unless they were actually on the billboard platform. What I would like to suggest, and I think it does a couple of things. It also offers some clarity to our licensees, as well as a number of stakeholders that we continue to hear from, which is look at 935 CMR 500.1054. Think about what clearly are the messages that we want to make sure on that billboard. For me, it's for use only by adults 21 years of age or older, and please consume responsibly. And I think we can work in some language. There is certainly language that our communications department is tracking down for me in terms of how we can better lay out how large we want to see that wording on a billboard. Obviously, we don't want to completely dominate the billboard. We understand the person paying for the billboard is trying to advertise their business. But when I looked at some of those warnings that we want to make sure are on packaging or in advertising, the ones that really stuck out to me are for use, again, only by adults 21 age or over, and please consume responsible. Doesn't say I don't have any interest in the other warnings, but I think those could be attached to packaging because some of those seem tailored for the person buying the product and make them aware. But they're more of, once I get the package in my hand, what are some of those warnings I should have? So again, this is around advertising, more around billboards, but maybe clarifying the language that we definitely want to see. And again, coming up with that language that we make sure it's visible to somebody driving down the highway.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, ultimately, you know, looking at those billboards, you can't. I mean, I come up the Southeast Expressway, and some of the stuff that you see on some of those billboards, and people are reading them and are almost getting into accidents. So, you know, we're worried about public safety, but there is a public safety component to making sure that you're not asking people to read something that could, you know, potentially impact their ability to drive. And I can tell you on the Southeast Expressway, there are some billboards that have dictionaries up there, and I can see people trying to read them. And you know, there are enough fender benders on the expressway. So I think that this is a good idea. I don't know if you know, Commissioner Stebbins, you'd like to maybe work a little bit more closely with the comms team. And you know, I don't know if this is something that Dr. Johnson can help us with, or if even needs be. But you know, there might be some sort of study standard that tells you what is reasonable to put on a billboard when people are driving 60 miles an hour, and whether or not, you know, language makes sense. So would you, I mean, obviously you've looked into this. Is this something that we could ask you to work on and maybe present us with a little bit more of a report, maybe in August?
Sure, be happy to do that.
Mr. Roy?
I'd be glad to assist Commissioner Stebbins. We've kind of worked on this in the past, so I'd be
Great.
more than happy to.
If the two of
buddy
you
up.
could be a little subcommittee to kind of look at that and bring us something back, I'd appreciate that.
Great. And thank you, Chair. And just the last thing is, you know, there's been talk about the 2-driver rule, the delivery courier license type. I'm happy to kind of put a pin in it and think about it. I think there's some other issues that we should consider. I don't have a complete list of what they are around the delivery courier model, but into the discussion around the 2-driver rule, I know when I've talked to some of the courier licensees that we've had, I've asked them to not only think of the 2-driver rule, but what are the other things that we might be able to do to make the license type a little more efficient, a little easier for them to manage, at the same time not jeopardizing public health or safety, obviously. But I like the fact we want to bring it up, and certainly there's more discussion and questions that I might have.
Thank you. And Commissioner Roy, you had one other item.
Yeah, I just wanted to share this thought that according to the Acts of 2022, Chapter 180, and I've asked legal, so I believe I'm correct, that a licensee can contribute to the social equity fund, and that would satisfy a component of their positive impact plan. So I feel a lot of folks aren't aware of this, and I don't know if we expand the definition to 500-101, a plan by the marijuana establishment to positively impact areas of disproportionate impact as defined by the commission for the purpose established by MGLC 94G section 4 A.5 4. If we need to add also that a donation to the social equity fund would satisfy a component of their positive impact plan. If it's in statute, I don't know if we should lift it and shift it into regulation.
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Concepcion.
I just wanted to add, that's already being added. So that line, yeah, that's a part of and Sean, I'm looking at our executive director just to make sure he co-signs that as well, that was a part of the lift for the regulatory changes under the new law.
Yep. Okay. All right.
I can confirm. Yep.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. See, one done.
So good job, Commissioner Roy.
Well, Commissioner.
Right. Very good. Or Commissioner Concepcion, I guess. So the ones that I want to sort of run past everybody, I think I've talked about this before, but making plastic cards for medical patients optional. You know, I know that there may be some technology issues that we have to take a look at, but this not only could be a time saving for patients, we get rid of extra plastic in the environment, but it also could save the commission a significant amount of money because we no longer charge people for those cards. This is with an understanding that anyone who chooses to have a card and to hold it as, you know, something they consider an easier way to telegraph their participation in this program, that will always be an option. But I didn't know if anyone had any opposition to putting that in the pile and then letting our staff determine just how low that is. So anybody, any comments or questions about that? Go ahead, Commissioner Roy.
I support that as long as we keep some form of a card.
Yes.
We're not proposing eliminating verification as a certified medical patient. Okay.
Yeah. We need to figure out what that is, but rather than having to, I mean, one of the first meetings I had with some of the, you know, the service people, you know, looking at the piles of cards that come back because, you know, they didn't get there in the mail or the bad address or something like that. So, the other item that I was hoping to put into, and this may or may not be low-hanging fruit, but trying to find ways that we can cut costs for licensees, and two different items that had been brought up to me. I don't know, and I, you know, would like our investigative team, and I'm not sure if Chief GB is on the call, but if this is a conversation for later, but going from 90 to 60 days on how long people have to store their video in the cloud, we could save money for licensees. You know, certainly maybe we'd like to have 1,000 days where we store something like that, but you know, I'm not sure that the length of time that we do require that storage. So unless the commissioners have a gut reaction against something like that, I'd like to put this in the pile to get people thinking about what that might mean, what the you know, downside of something like that is. But I certainly, you know, have been told by enough licensees that the upside would be that they could save, you know, meaningful amount of money each month on cloud storage fees. And then one other item that had been raised to me is the architectural review fee. That, you know, while we're not necessarily providing architecturally sound response to some changes, you know, we are charging a fee for that. And I am sensitive. The executive director has said that we need to be sensitive about cutting fees when, you know, we are going to the legislature to, you know, argue for our budget. But I do think that we should be looking for ways to provide some cushion for our licensees who I know all of us are getting letters from different licensees about not being able to pay their taxes, and there are a number of businesses that are potentially on the verge of having to shut down, and I want to be mindful of that. So I don't know if anybody wants to push back, tell me why that's wrong, or maybe have Sean play devil's advocate again, but you know, those are two items that have been brought to my attention by different licensees, and I wanted to see if anyone is viscerally opposed to that, or if we could put that in the pile for review. Commissioner Concepcion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have an opposition to that. You did jog something along the same lines that I wanted to raise, and it slipped me. So I want to finish with your suggestion, and then there's something that is sort of, it dovetails nicely into
tangential to that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. If anybody, do you want to just add that, because maybe we can put this big pile on Sean's plate and get him to devil us. So we know that time is a large cost for the licensees and prospective licensees. So the time that they wait for reviews and the different steps within the process. One of the conversations I had somewhat recently
with some of our social equity licensees was around the wait period it takes for the sort of architectural review and other reviews. And that was really costly to them when, you're paying all these other fees. So the question was, and I'll pose this to the entire group, was around, I know we have expedited review. We do that for certain license types, but broadening that expedited review to, the architectural reviews, the other parts throughout the process. And I know I'm Sean, you're not looking at the camera, but I'm looking at you to see what kind of reaction you have, because I know that this is something that might seem like an easy lift for us at the commission level, but it could possibly be a larger lift for the staff and how they sort of operate. But I did want to throw that out there because it was a conversation about cost and how do we sort of mediate that. And a large amount of feedback I received actually in a few different settings was about the time and having to wait for them to get through the entire process.
He's not looking at you, but there's a silent scream coming out of his mouth.
I know.
So.
That's why. Welcome back, Sean.
It's not a silent scream. It won't be a loud one either. It's really, for me, I want to just acknowledge the workload and bandwidth. If we could multiply several times over our investigators and staff, we certainly would. And I think we are hiring, to be clear, and I'd love to be in a position to hire more. I'll use this as an opportunity to advocate to any legislator that may be listening. We appreciate their support. We are grateful for any increase in funding that we can receive, which would allow us to expand our team. And that's really what it boils down to. I think to the chair's point as to fees, that is something that the commission is well within your rights to consider. And I appreciate her acknowledging the delicate balance we face with revenue versus the cost of, so any revenue that we generate does go to the Marijuana Regulation Fund. A portion of that is obviously set aside to social equity funding. So we want to be careful as to not inadvertently decrease that pie of funding. At the same time, we want to make sure that it is manageable and that the costs are both predictable and affordable or reasonable for our licensees, and then our ability to process things. And we have one of the things that we are thinking about as our team and our workforce development of where we want to go as an agency, of course, is versatility, knowing that we need to meet the industry where it is as well. And that includes in trying as best we can to anticipate once someone gets a license, what comes next. It's going to be agent registrations, it's going to be architectural reviews, it could be structural changes. And then once a licensee is in fact operational, we've talked a little bit today in the context of micro businesses, their ability to go and secure or solicit investors. That may result in a change of ownership or change of control application coming forward. With publicly traded companies, boards are shifting. That too is a change of ownership and control. And those are all things that we process on this. That's the same team doing that work. And so that time frame, our ability to really slim that time frame down, it's never going to be at the cost of quality or the cost of thoroughness. It's just a matter of our ability to duplicate our team or replicate our team and scale it accordingly. But we get that feedback a lot. We try to be as responsive as we are able to be. And sometimes, of course, the answer is we're working on it. And as you point out, that businesses, as they are, especially as they're eager to get open, any perceived delay is going to cause them some agita, and that's fair. But again, I think it really for us boils down to just having the sufficient team in place, because the quality is good, the quality is there. It's just a matter of our ability to balance the workload itself. So, and again, we are hiring. So let me use that as a opening to tout the fact that please check our website, please check Mass Careers, please apply. We'd love to have folks join our team.
All right, thank you, Sean, and thanks everybody. I think we're sort of, one of the things, and this is also, one of the conversations I've had with Sean is, taking a look at how our organization is currently configured. Do we have resources in the right place to meet our mission? So at some point in time in the not too distant future, I'd like to have that, conversation about are we properly deploying our resources after we've grown up for 5 years as a startup? So, that's one of the things I'd like to talk about in the future. So, that being said, are there any other questions, comments? We're not going to be taking any votes, so we are probably ready. Go ahead, Commissioner Camargo.
Yeah, really quickly. Thank you, Madam Chair. How are you looking to proceed? So if we have other stuff that comes up, in the next few weeks, it sounds like we're going to continue to do this. How do you want to operationalize that?
I think we kind of put a circle around what our potential are right now. I mean, as I said, I'd like us to be doing, and as Commissioner, Stebbins had pointed out with the Gaming Commission, that regulatory writing is an ongoing process, but that we try to get from this list, we call, a very, very small list of things that are truly, going to support the industry, support equity, support our patients, and we can do it in a way that, lowers the burden on our staff to get that done. All of these ideas we have consensus on. So all of these ideas, I'm hoping, obviously some with a little bit more thought and review, but that all of these things are things that we can accomplish in the near future, if not as quickly as we're doing, some of the municipal changes. But whatever these ideas, keep giving them to Mike Baker, but this is the list that I think we're going to hone in on right now as being easy, that I'm hoping we can get this done in time to then, when we are, we give it to the Secretary of State's office. We voted on this, we've given it to the Secretary of State's office. Then there is the official comment period, again, pointing out to the public that you are having a stakeholder listening session, but that's not, that there's going to be another bite at that apple once you draft what you draft. So I'm hoping that we have a handful of these things that meet both we all agree, and it's doable for our staff in a short period of time, and we can get that initial tranche in there. And then all of these things are going to be part of what we're working on. It just, one is more, some may be more timely than others. Does that make sense? Go ahead, Commissioner Camargo.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm just, and I'm sure you'll update this, you'll update us maybe next month or something, but I'm just, Sean, I know you're on the call. I'm just curious of, how do then we move forward, right, with this stuff? Like, is this now that you give this to the legal team and then it goes to where? Like, I'm really curious about that, just operationally, and just thinking about all the work that our team has on their plate. The other thing I would say too is, Madam Chair, according to Google, there's not a lot of other words you can use for this. It says low risk, high yield, or easy pickings as other
easy
names.
easy pickings.
So I wanted to share that with you. But yeah, so I don't know, Sean, do you mind elaborating a little bit of how you think this process will go? Because I'm just really curious about the behind the scenes operations to actually get this to the finish line.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner, for the question. It's as you can imagine, our team is hard at work, busy right now, really reacting to the drafts that have been submitted by the various working groups. Also, as has been illuminated and I think revealed a little bit today, there's other items that were part of Chapter 180 that may not have required a working group. And the two examples that have been referenced, one was suitability. The second was based on Commissioner Roy's question as to the positive impact plans and what qualifies. And again, a donation or a contribution to the Social Equity Trust Fund would now qualify as satisfying that. So those are things that are sitting essentially with a let's call it a red line draft of our regulations. And so based on today's conversation, we can take some of the items that were of discussion today, if they lend themselves to easy, simple, straightforward drafting that doesn't require a lot of either brand new sections or really, heavy policy lifts that the commission ought to chew on. We can incorporate them into that now pending draft. I tend to revert to what is essentially a legislative world, which is the regulations essentially exist as statute. And again, please don't interpret this as being a literal translation. Instead, the changes that are being proposed are essentially amendments to that existing statute. Please, again, this is just simply for clarification's sake. These changes we can make in a red line version. I would suggest and I anticipate with sort of a comment bubble, which can then serve as an annotated version that says this change is based on this discussion that occurred on June 26th. And again, that might be the addition of certified nurse practitioners when their ability to certify without the requirement for a supervising physician or provider. The additional telehealth. And again, to be clear, we're not interpreting telehealth as being a done deal, but instead for the commission to consider in draft form. We feel as though if those changes lend themselves to that technical of a shift, a red line, that we can return those to the commission with the HCA, municipal equity, and other provisions, and then give the commission the ability to vote or adopt or frankly discuss and review and debate those changes, but present them to you in a draft form. Again, nothing today is final. Nothing today is cast in stone, but instead it gives me and the legal team the direction to draft them. And it could be that once we put pen to paper, it doesn't lend itself to an easy solution. And we would come back to the commission and say, we're not saying no, we're just saying, you know, can we possibly have some more time to vet this? So I hope that answers your question, but I think what you'll get is basically that annotated version that says this change is reflective of the June 26th discussion.
Commissioner Roy, then Commissioner Stebbins.
As we're talking now, my mind is getting jogged in different areas, and this might be a standalone topic for a future agenda item, but I think a few of us have met with folks around slotting fees. And for those that aren't familiar, it's a practice that's starting to really gain some traction in Massachusetts in cannabis space. And it really is impacting our smaller cultivators and product manufacturers that can't compete with the MSOs. Folks are paying, I'm hearing, up to $600,000 for prime placement in a dispensary for product placement. Connecticut, New York, and California have regulations to prohibit this. If I can just read Connecticut's language around slotting fees. Connecticut statute that no cannabis retailer or hybrid retailer shall accept payment or other form of compensation directly or indirectly from a cultivator, a micro cultivator, producer, food and beverage manufacturer, product manufacturer, or product packager to carry cannabis product for placement or promotion of such a product in a retailer establishment or through promotional initiatives. No retailer or hybrid retailer shall enter into a contract with a cultivator, micro cultivator, producer, food and beverage manufacturer, product manufacturer that requires or permits preferential treatment, exclusivity or near exclusivity, or limits a retailer from purchasing from cultivators, micro cultivators, and manufacturers, et cetera, et cetera. So what's happening is that from what I understand from meetings with stakeholders, that multi-state operators or those with more financial resources are paying slotting fees to get prime placement in prime dispensaries throughout the state, and that our smaller licensees cannot compete with this, and it's almost driving them out. So I'm wondering if that needs to be a separate discussion or something that the commission will be in favor of at least discussing around slotting fees, and if we feel it's something we should prohibit in Massachusetts.
I'll go ahead, Commissioner Concepcion. Sorry.
Thank you. I would just need more information on this, just because I understand who it's detrimental to, but I'm also thinking about those retailers that are benefiting from that practice too. So this is new and it wasn't on my, you know, in my peer review, but I would like to just know more about it before making some decision on it.
So maybe we can get a presentation at some point in time in the future. But I do think that it's something that businesses that are engaging in that understand that it's on our radar screen to be thinking about that. Commissioner Stebbins?
Well, just before, but I just want to really make sure that we get the input of the retailers as well, because I understand that this might be detrimental for some of the smaller manufacturers, but just when you do, I would like to just hear more from the retailers.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do is you know, in a meeting in the future, the next several months, let's try to get some sort of a report that can be shared with all the commissioners, so we can have a more informed conversation about this. Thank you, Commissioner Stebbins.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. There was a comment that our executive director made about our staff probably sitting, listening to this meeting and their heads, brains, whatever, spinning in 10,000 different directions. Certainly want to obviously acknowledge that we understand everything that's on their plate already, and certainly appreciate all the work that they would help us with in terms of addressing a number of these topics. I do want to go back and maybe at a future meeting, allow the executive director to bring forward some of those maybe staff-driven changes that they would like to see, because we know they're living and working through these regulations on a daily basis, and they may see some things through a tweak or a red line that would allow them to do their job more efficiently, more effectively, as well as maybe save some time and frustration or workload on behalf of our licensees. I don't know if we might be able to do that, but certainly put that out there for consideration.
I agree, Commissioner Stebbins, and that list has been, in place for some time. And again, this is, why I wanted to have this meeting and have this conversation, just to sort of kind of get a sense of what, what the there is right now. We now have sort of opened the Pandora's box, if you will, so we all have a little bit of an understanding of what we can and now can't talk about, because we have, aired this here. So maybe if the staff, in looking at this, long list here, has some suggestions for things that are much more simple that maybe we haven't had a chance to talk about here today, they could share that with us in a way that doesn't violate the open meeting law. So I will have a conversation with Mercedes and Mike, who've been doing just a great job leading this process for us, to see how we can take the staff recommendations and make sure that we all get this in a way that doesn't violate open meeting, but that allows us to maybe provide some approval in the next couple of meetings. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And again, we do apologize to the staff in advance, and we don't want people have been working very hard on these regulations, and we actually our working group, we had a couple of different meetings last week trying to gain consensus around the memo that hopefully will be out this week for municipalities. So again, I thank all of the staff who've been on these different subcommittees working on this, and I thank my fellow commissioners for the hard work they've been putting in on this stuff. So at that, we have gained consensus, at least initially, on some items. We have some items that we know we need to get additional information before we can gain that consensus. So are there any other questions or comments? Can you flip the page, Betsy, so I can look and see what, thank you. I thought I knew what that was, but if we put that up there. So anyway, I'm just looking at this. All right, just announcing. So we have July 13th and July 17th. Is it, we have 2 meetings scheduled in July, but is it 3? I can't remember. Were we going to have a 3rd meeting in July? Had we talked about that?
I don't think we've discussed that amongst ourselves.
Okay, Grace is saying no. So, okay. All right. That's okay. I just wanted to make sure. So we just have the 2 meetings that are there. So, all right. Unless there are additional comments or questions, I will entertain a motion to adjourn with our next meeting date being July 13th and a second meeting date being July 17th. Do I have a motion, Commissioner Stebbins?
So moved.
Do I hear a second, Commissioner Camargo?
Second.
Having been moved and seconded, I will take a call of the roll. Commissioner Camargo?
Aye.
Commissioner Concepcion?
Aye.
Commissioner Roy?
Aye.
Commissioner Stebbins?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. 5 in favor, none opposed. This meeting stands adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.